Thank you. Millions of Americans live in a region called Appalachia. In sections of Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, and South Carolina, hundreds of thousands of people speak Appalachian dialect. That was certainly true of my hometown, Harlan, Kentucky. Now, you may have heard of Harlan. It's the setting of Justified, a current FX network series. Sounds like you have. It's also the topic of a song by Brad Paisley and Patty Loveless, "You Won't Leave Harlan Alive." It was the topic of Harlan County, USA, which covered the Brookside coal mine strikes in the 1930s. And it is still the namesake of Bloody Harlan, which is also a reference to the wars between the thugs and the miners during their attempt to unionize. Florence Reese and her husband Sam were mine unionizers. During this little audio interview today, you'll be able to hear an example of Appalachian dialect. If you were able to hear Florence Reese and her example of Appalachian dialect today, what you would hear is the language that is really surrounding hundreds of thousands of people. I grew up in Harlan.
They take the women's butcher knives. Anything they get, they thought you'd fight them. They take that. But one evening late, they come and search my house. And they'd wear breastplates and leg irons, till the men couldn't hardly shoot them. So one was looking in my suitcase, he's kind of an old man. And, I never did want to beat a man's brains out so bad, but I know not to touch or say nothing. But the next day, somebody shot him all to pieces. But it wasn't me, I don't know. I wouldn't have cared if it had to have been me.
So in 1984, I graduated from Harlan High School. 2 years later, I was home at Christmas break, sitting on the countertop in the kitchen, and correcting my dad's English. I'd become an English major and minored in journalism, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "Honey, your daddy didn't send you to college to come home and tell him how to talk." Well, that was in complete contrast to what my mother had told me all my life. She'd say, "Honey, if you ever want to get out of here, you got to learn how to talk." So my dad knew, of course, that our dialect connected us to the richness of that culture and to that community. But my mother knew what the Appalachian Regional Commission would ultimately report. Speakers of Appalachian dialect live in regions that have low graduation rates, high unemployment rates, and few economic opportunities. And therefore, Mom's perception remained mine until 1993. By 93, I was an English teacher. I was earning my master's in English, and I'd enrolled in the Coastal Georgia Writing Project. And there I met Dr. Pat Fox. That summer, she suggested, "Why don't you develop a workshop on Appalachian dialect?" And I clearly remember saying to her, "Why would anybody want to know anything about that dialect? I've spent my entire life trying to learn not to talk like that." But she insisted, and that summer, I learned that Dad didn't always speak bad English. Actually, Appalachian dialect is rooted in the language of Shakespeare. It's rooted in Elizabethan English, in words and phrases in the King James Version Bible, and many years later, in the phrases of the Scot-Irish settlers who fled religious persecution in Europe and came into those mountains. You see, that summer I learned why kids in my Sunday school class said he learnt me. Why my dad would say he prayed with neighbors who were awful sick. Why my mother would say I bit my fingernail into the quick. And why we would all talk on cold winter nights about the cows that lowed in the fields. There are other Appalachian dialect words that you may be familiar with: reckon, yonder, learnt, kilt. There's no predicting him. How for is it? The milk is blinked, and I don't care to, which means I'd be more than happy to. I mean, literally wouldn't care anyway. So after I graduated from college, Appalachian Dialect followed me into my first job. I was a newspaper reporter at the Fort Smith Times-Record, and I covered the poultry industry. One evening, I filed a story, and my copy editor yelled across that cavernous newsroom. She said, "Phoenicia, what in the world is a dittler?" "And a dittler," I yelled back, "well, that's a little chicken." And she said, "There's no such word as dittler. Change that word to chick." So I went through the whole story and changed the word to chick. Little did I know that today I'd be able to Google dittler and find, oh yes, that it means a little chicken. A colloquialism of rural Appalachia. Unfortunately today, you can also Google Harlan County and find that it has a 32% poverty rate and a 13% unemployment rate. Balancing appreciation for dialect while learning standard English is essential if young people in those troubled counties are going to ever have an opportunity, the opportunity to stay or to leave. So what is the balance? I believe that balance hinges on place. Place determines whether dialect or standard English is appropriate. For example, when I'm home and I'm really happy, I'll say, "Oh, I'm as happy as a coon in a roast near patch." And then I translate that for my husband, who's from New Jersey. And it simply means I'm as happy as a raccoon in a large field of roasted ears of corn. But at work, I would never say that. I simply say I'm extremely happy or very pleased. And occasionally my husband will say he's happy like that coon, but he hasn't gotten the rest of it down. What you actually see is that my parents provided me with balance. My mother ensured I would always have a choice. My father ensured I could always come home, and I'd call that a balancing act. Thank you.